Well,
troubleshooting on site can be its own thing. Um, what is walk me through? We don't have a whole lot of time. We have 9 minutes, but walk me through what your thought process is when you arrive on site. If there's an issue with the keg system, where do you start in that troubleshooting, and like how do you walk through that?
yep. So when somebody calls, a lot of times I'll try to turn them to like a FaceTime, just because I want to see their setup and I want to see the system. And you start at the very beginning. You start at the CO2 tank. Make sure that the tank and the regulator are connected properly, and then you go to the PSI. Is the PSI set correctly? And then you go down to the switch that's the valve that's below the regulator to make sure that that's on, and then you go to the manifold and make sure that the connections are all tight and proper, and that all the manifold check valves are open, and then you go to the beer coupler. You just start at the beginning and go step by step all the way to the jockey box and then all the way to the faucet. And it could be, because there are so many connections, it could be any one of those. And a lot of times, if you're pouring beer and you're getting foam, it's one of two things. It's temperature or it's pressure. And so if the pressure is too high or too low, you're going to get foam. If the temperature isn't correct, like let's say you just hooked up your jockey box and you filled it 3/4 full of ice, and then you hooked your keg up and you tried to pour beer. If your jockey box or jumper box hasn't had time to acclimate, meaning all of the coils and all the shanks and the faucet, that your cooler hasn't had time to cool down to the same temperature, sometimes that can cause foam. So we tell people to fill the cooler completely full of ice, so everything in there is being touched by ice, and then walk away and give it time for it to kind of cool down and kind of give the ice time to do its job. And then as people are pouring, one of the downsides to a jockey box is sometimes as that ice melts, it can create kind of like this little bubble inside of it where the ice really just isn't touching the coils anymore. And sometimes you got to open up the lid and just move the ice around a little bit. And that can be that can be a small, subtle thing that can throw off your system. So really you start the beginning and then move to the faucet. So
Yeah, and if the 6-foot jumpers between the keg and the jockey or jumper box, that'll give you a little insight on if you have an issue before the jockey box too. If it's bubbly in the line, then there's an issue. One sneaky hang up is there's a little ball inside of a Sankey coupler it's a backflow preventer. That will stick sometimes. So the ball will sit down when it's not being poured, and then it'll push up and release the beer when you'd want it to. But sometimes that'll stick because beer is sticky, and if you don't clean it immediately and well, it can create like a little adhesive, and so you just poke that little ball and things should get moving. And that I forget about that sometimes, and then it'll click, and I'm like, oh, this is it. It's usually a simple fix. It's one of those things. You'll have an issue here and there, and we, like Chris said, we do what we can to alleviate that. So with our boxes, when you open the lid, there's QR codes on there that you can scan for if there's basically 4 or 5 things that can go wrong, and they're all on there. So we try to make it as easy as possible to make your day go well, selfishly, so you don't call us at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. But well, don't anyway, because we won't answer. But we will on a Friday. But yeah, nobody
The
wants.
number of times
What's that?
the number of times it was just that the gas was off.
Yep.
Like everything else was fine, but I had turned the regulator off to like switch out something, and then
And
yeah,
another
that's
one
all.
is that washer in between the CO2 tank and the regulator. There's what we sell has a built-in O-ring, but that's an O-ring. They're designed to fail at some point, so you want to have replacements, and that can if your regulator gets really frosty, that's the issue more often than not, is that gas gets missing. So keep a handful of those around.